youth player, played for the first team, just cares so much about Wimbledon. There's no question about that. But, at what point do you try to figure out a different path forward to try to stay up? It's not clear. But Eric pointed out in the letter that clubs who fire their manager mid-season do not often see an improvement in results.
No.
And so it's just a really hard thing. I mean, one of the reasons that this is such a difficult season is, if you go back and listen to early episodes of the pod where I'm talking about Wimbledon in the fourth tier of English football, I say over and over again that they have the smallest stadium, they have one of the smallest playing budgets, and yet they somehow found a way to get promoted. Well, in the third tier of English football, it's only going to be harder. And so these are big problems. I do not have a solution for them. I don't think anyone does. It's just a really hard time. So right now, Wimbledon are second to last in the League One table. Have to find a way to finish 20th this year to stay up. If we've somehow managed to do that, that means that we can make it to next year. And during the season next year, hopefully the new stadium will open and Wimbledon will be on the up and up again. But it's just going to be a hard year. There's no two ways about it.
All right, John, the news from Mars. If you want an Opportunity rover update, basically NASA's going to keep listening until January, but it has been 4 months now, so not great. But additionally to that, so in order to get the Mars 2020 rover to the surface of Mars, a number of things have to go right. One of those things is, they're going to shoot this thing at Mars very, very fast so that it gets there relatively quickly. And then it slows down by hitting Mars. The part of Mars that it hits first is, of course, the atmosphere. So Mars has a pretty thin atmosphere, but it is enough of an atmosphere that it can slow down, especially because the thing isn't going to go straight at Mars. It's going to go sort of parallel so that it spends a lot more time in the atmosphere. That slows it down. But then it will release its parachute. And they have been testing the parachute that will get the Mars 2020 rover onto the surface of Mars a bunch. Just did the final test, and it opened perfectly.
Great.
And the thing about this is, so one, you have to figure out how to simulate the atmosphere of Mars. So in order to do that, you have to have the parachute open on Earth's atmosphere, which is much thicker, except when you're at a high altitude. So they shoot this thing way up in the air, they get it going very fast, and then they open it at a specific speed at a specific altitude, which is the speed that it will be going and the pressure of the Mars atmosphere, which is basically perfect. We can actually simulate this really accurately. And then they have different loads that is on the end of the parachute to make sure that the parachute doesn't rip or rupture, which their early experiments when they were first starting to do this did a lot. Because the parachute opens in around of I think 0.4 of a second, so it's about the size of a house. So it goes from the size of like a log of wood to like that you would throw on a fire to the size of a house in a 1/4 of a second. So that's a lot of pressure, and it is a sudden and tremendous amount of weight that is yanking on all of these nylon fibers and all of the stitching and all of the fabric. So the parachute opened perfectly at supersonic speeds with a load of 67,000 pounds. It's the heaviest ever payload for a parachute ever, any parachute. And 85% heavier than the payload that Mars 2020's parachute will have to slow during its descent toward Mars. So, as they do at NASA, this is planned to succeed way beyond where it will have to succeed, and it has succeeded quite well. So that's great news for Mars 2020. The parachute is functional. The rover body is getting painted right now. The chassis is complete, and they got all the holes drilled in it, and all the instruments are still under construction for the most part, but will be being finished up soon and shipped over to start being assembled into the final rover.
It's just amazing. Didn't the first Mars rover, didn't Curiosity not use a parachute, or did it use a parachute?
It used a parachute, so it's a combination of multiple slowing systems.
So it uses the parachute, and then there's the rockets that fire toward the surface of Mars.
Yeah, I mean, technically, the first slowdown is just the capsule hitting the atmosphere, and so that
Right.
slows it down a lot. And then the parachute opens to slow it down even further, because if the parachute opened at when it first hit the atmosphere, the parachute would totally rip off because it'd be going
Right.
too fast. So it slows down a lot just by going through the atmosphere. Then the parachute opens, then it drops the parachute, and it gets lowered by this ridiculous sky crane thing placed carefully on the surface of Mars, which is, I can't freaking believe it worked even now.
Wait, a sky crane will land on Mars first and then lower the rover down?
No, the sky crane is a crane that is suspended in the sky by retro rockets. So
Wow.
yeah,
That is cool.
yeah, it's pretty cool.
It just completely boggles my mind how much engineering brilliance goes into this. Like, there was just a problem on the International Space Station where there was this, like, pinprick sized hole.
Mm-hmm.
And they had to patch it or whatever. I don't really remember the details. What I remember is they were like, what probably caused this is human error when doing the stitching. And I was like, oh, right. All of this stuff that is going into space is made by people. Somehow I had not internalized that.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Like, when they're talking about building the chassis for Mars 2020, they're talking about, like, drilling the holes that the instruments will connect to, and they drill each one by hand. Like,
Right.
And they do a pilot hole, and then they do a second pilot hole to make sure that they're in the exact right spot, and then they do the final drill. Because, like, every hole, of course, needs to be, like, perfectly in exactly the right spot, but it's done by a person. There's a person with a drill.
Yeah, like, we are not a species of artificial intelligence or whatever. We are a biological phenomenon, like turning cloth and metal into space stations.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's what you should tell your interviewer when they ask you to tell them a bit about you.
And every one of those people came out of a person.
It's humans all the way down. Hank, thank you for podding with me. Thanks to everybody for listening. We're going to go now and make our Patreon podcast at patreon.com/DearHankandJohn. It's called This Week in Ryans, and it is terrible.
It's bad. This podcast is edited by Nicholas Jenkins. So is This Week in Ryans. It's produced by Rosianna Halse-Rojas and Sheridan Gibson. Our head of community and communications is Victoria Bongiorno. The music that you're hearing now and at the beginning of the podcast is by the great Gunnarolla, and as they say in our hometown, don't forget to be awesome. Hi, I'm Hank Green.
And I'm John Green.
It seems that we find ourselves in a cold open.
That's right. We're here to tell you about our podcast from WNYC Studios, Dear Hank and John.
You might know us from the internet, where we've been making videos back and forth on the YouTube channel Vlogbrothers since 2007, as well as creating educational series like Crash Course and SciShow, among many others.
We're also authors. My books include The Fault in Our Stars, Looking for Alaska, and Turtles All the Way Down.
And my first novel, An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, just came out.
And it's excellent. It debuted at #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. Anyway, we have a podcast in which, you know what, just roll the intro.
Welcome to Dear Hank and John.
Or as I prefer to think of it, Dear John and Hank.
It's a podcast where my brother John and I answer your questions, give you dubious advice, and bring you all the week's news from both Mars and the world's greatest third-tier English soccer team, AFC Wimbledon.
You know, Hank, we've always said our advice is dubious, but sometimes we give properly good advice.
That's a pretty bold assertion.
Like, remember Devin and the Secret Snake?
Or the time Pia wanted to know how to tell her family that she had secretly learned to play the fiddle.
Also, recently we told Lauren to change her name to a gang of turkeys when she was calling prospective students who happened to also be called Lauren.
Okay, maybe we'll stick with dubious advice for now.
Yeah, but remember Ashley? We had some pretty good advice for her question, right?
Roll the tape.
Dear John and Hank,
I was babysitting for a family I don't know very well, and the baby took his first steps
Aw.
while I was there.
That's cute.
Should I tell the parents? Ashley.
Oh, man. No, definitely don't do that.
What? See, I would argue, if anything, you should lie in the other direction. You should be like, listen, not only did your baby take his first steps, he also said his first word, and it was Ashley. It was my name. He looked me dead in the eyes and he said, "Hello, Ashley. I love you more than I love my mother."
I know they're only paying you $20 an hour, and that's crap. Don't accept it. I'm worth so much more than that. That's what he said. That's all. And then he stopped and he clammed up and he hasn't said anything since. So I don't know. That's just take what you will from that.
Walked all the way across the room, told me he did not approve of my compensation package, and then clammed right back up. See you next time.
It's Dear Hank and John from WNYC Studios. Subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts. And as they say in our hometown, don't forget to be awesome. Dear Hank and John is supported by Simple Contacts, the convenient way to renew your prescription and reorder your contacts from anywhere in minutes. Simple Contacts has all of the brands and types of lenses you are familiar with, and you can get $20 off your contacts at simplecontacts.com/DearHank20 or enter code DearHank20 at checkout.
Listener supported. WNYC Studios.
Hello, and welcome to Dear Hank and John.
Or as I prefer to think of it, Dear John and Hank.
It's a comedy podcast where these two brothers answer your questions, give you dubious advice, and bring you all the week's news from both Mars and AFC Wimbledon. John.
Yes, Hank.
Why does the Swedish Navy have barcodes on all its ships?
Why does the Swedish Navy have barcodes on all its ships?
So that when they return to port, they can Scandinavian. That was good, right?
No, it's terrible.
No, that one's really good. That was like the best one we've ever had.
Well, Hank, this week in good news, Dear Hank and John is officially a co-production of Complexly and WNYC Studios. We have finally joined the WNYC Studios family. What does that mean for you podcast listeners? Well, it means that you might get a slightly higher quality ad read and slightly higher quality ads. But other than that, I don't think it means much. The Anthropocene Reviewed is going to be a lot better. It's got some really cool sound design and sound composition from the brilliant Hannes Brown, who works a lot on Radiolab and other WNYC Studios podcasts. Anyway, we're really excited to be part of the WNYC Studios family, and yeah, it's good news.
And I'm also excited that SciShow Tangents is going to be in the world, also co-produced between Complexly and WNYC Studios. SciShow Tangents is a weird, slightly competitive fact showcase, show off between me and my friends who work on SciShow. So we have a very good time recording that. We've done a few episodes already, and I can't wait for them to be out in the world.
So check it out. I think you can search for SciShow Tangents wherever you get your podcasts, and you can subscribe now. Also, while you're there, subscribe to the Anthropocene Reviewed and every WNYC Studios podcast.
That's the big change. We're just going to be really all in on every WNYC Studios podcast. I mean, I do like them.
This is going to sound like a bit much, but I actually got a Radiolab tattoo.
Oh. Does it have ink in it this time, or is it like all your other tattoos?
I do love a good inkless tattoo. The great thing about them, Hank, is that you get to have a tattoo for like a week, and then it's gone.
You could just draw on yourself, but what's the fun in that? That costs like no money. John, do you want to answer some questions from our listeners?
Very much so.
This first question comes from Natalia, who asks, "Dear Hank and John, I work in a retail shoe store that offers a 10% military discount every day."
Hank, can I just stop you right there?
Uh-huh.
And I don't like to do this, but there is one question that is clearly, overwhelmingly, the most important question to answer first.
All right, well, we'll get back to Natalia's question later.
I think
in the podcast.
I think you know what I'm referring to, and I don't think we can wait.
Is it about peeing?
No.
And I have no idea.
Hank, our first question comes from Allison, who writes, "Dear John and Hank, I need help. My boyfriend wants to grow a mullet.
Oh, yeah, that is an important one.
I love and support him very much in everything he does.
Everything?
But a mullet, you don't have to, we know what the butt is, Allison.
Yeah.
Actually, the butt is extraordinarily generous in this sentence. It makes me think that Allison and her boyfriend have a truly wonderful relationship. Here's the butt. But a mullet is a hairstyle that takes a very long time to grow out and isn't very flattering. And I don't want mullet prom photos. How do I convince my sweet, sweet boyfriend not to